Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Hi, sorry about that, guys. Hi everyone, welcome to today's called Seizing the Electoral Non-Profit. Today's session is being hosted by Ontario Nonprofit Network and Maytree, our learning partner in community solutions in Canada. I'm Estelle Taylor, the Communications Manager at the ONN, and new to this webinar software. Today I'm operating as behind-the-scenes tech organizer, and so if you use the chat function on the webinar system, you'll be chatting with me. This webinar is the first in a 5-part series that features the content from 2 Maytree programs, Maytree Policy School and Civic Exchange. You can learn more about these programs at maytree.com. Today's audience includes people from all over Ontario, including North Bay, Owen Sound, Kitchener, and Ottawa, representing organizations of various sizes, from small grassroots organizations to large multi-service agencies. Let's get started. Alex Dow is moderating today's discussion. Alex is the Director of Neighbourhood Initiatives at United Way Toronto and York region. Over the past decade, he's worked with residents and a variety of stakeholders to build community capacity and create change on critical community issues, including food security, civic engagement, and public space and placemaking. Alex, thanks a lot for moderating today. Why don't you start things off by sharing with our webinar participants what the United Way is doing to seize the electoral moment?
Great, thank you, Estelle. And I'm happy to be here moderating today, the conversation. United Way really in 2014 in our new strategic plan embraced a new kind of community impact approach. And so that approach really is reflective of all the work we do across all of our community priorities. And as you'll see on the slide, it's everything from research to advocacy. So, you know, we really named advocacy as an important part of our work moving forward. Of course, we do advocacy in a number of ways. So as you'll see on the slide, part of it is improving the public's understanding of these issues, but also influencing decision makers. And so that is through the convening of tables or the building of networks, our relationships with our partners who are on the ground, who advise us in terms of what they're seeing on the ground and the potential policy directions that we should be taking. We also engage community across all this work. Our funded agencies engage community every day. Our Strong Neighborhoods initiatives engage communities in defining what the issues are that are relevant to their communities. And so community engagement and the voice of lived experience is really important to the positions that we take and the work that we do. And we'll hear a bit more from our panelists about how they kind of do that from the agency standpoint. I'll just give a couple of brief examples about you know, how we're seizing the electoral moment. We are at a time when there are 2 elections, municipally and provincially, happening this year. We'll have a federal election again in short time. So, you know, in terms of our municipal work, United Way really focuses on, a good example is our Commitment to Community campaign. It's a coalition of agencies supported by kind of like a network of backbone organizations. Social Planning Toronto, one of our funded agencies, is a really critical part of that advocacy effort. And that's really looking at municipal issues as an example. Provincially, we're working on Platform 2018. It's a call to action. Again, it's a really important network and collaborative that brings together a number of organizations, other foundations, public policy folks, and policymakers. And it's really looking at how can we influence the 3 major political parties on a number of important issues to the region and Ontario at large. So poverty reduction, housing and homelessness, income security, decent work, all of those things are critically important. And as you'll know from kind of the kind of policy issues that are in the paper right now, that work doesn't begin or didn't begin in the last couple of months. It's been ongoing work that's been taking place since the last election, really, and before. Nationally, for example, we are part of a national housing collaborative, and so that really is looking at what housing policies, supportive housing benefits can be created. And I'm sure a number of people on the call, and I know some of the panelists are involved in or have been involved in that work as well. So at the center of all this is partnership. As you'll see kind of from our community impact approach, that's really central to this work, and we're going to hear more about that from others as well. So I'd like to welcome the panel. We have 3 esteemed guests with us who do this work day in and day out, and I'll introduce them in the order that they'll be speaking and giving their introductory remarks. So to my right is Beatrice Alice, and Beatrice works for North York Community House. On the screen, we have Anita Khanna, who works as the National Coordinator for Campaign 2000. And Anita will share some more remarks about herself shortly. Hi, Anita. And then, and Anita's in Ottawa. The rest of us are in Toronto. And to my left is Lubna Khalid, who's the coordinator of Women Speak Out and a peer navigation training program, both important initiatives related to civic engagement. So I'll start with Beatrice. And Beatrice, as I mentioned, works for North York Community House. She's a community engagement coordinator. And a key component of her work has been to develop and implement civic engagement opportunities. And what's been really important in the orchestration of those activities is that they are accessible to people of varying backgrounds, people that have different accessibility barriers or language competencies, and different levels of civic awareness and understanding. And so a lot of her activities, she's done the full range of kind of on-the-ground organizing, civic literacy workshops and trainings, community outreach, get out the vote campaigns during election time, and also embedding civic engagement activities into different annual community events. So Beatrice is going to speak about the importance of engaging community and residents and some strategies for doing it effectively. But before we do that, we're going to also Estella's going to help us by administering a quick poll. And so it should be popping up on people's screens, I believe. And the polling question is going to be, what are some strategies that you've used to successfully engage community and residents? And so you can select all that apply. And in a few seconds, we should be getting some results. And Beatrice, I'm not sure if you have a favorite among these options.
Actually, I think they're all really important. And of course, they can be used almost at different points of our work. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't really have any particular one that's a favorite. And I think some of them are also more adequate for certain activities and others for other activities.
Great. So you draw on the different techniques as needed, depending on where you are in your campaign organizing or your get out the vote work.
Exactly, and oftentimes these are kind of like starting points, or sometimes used in evaluations, such as like focus groups, for example. So kind of like at the beginning and then at the end, but of course the core of the work happens in the middle, where you're actually doing the face-to-face work, or the phone calling, or whatever else you're doing on the ground.
Awesome. So you have to be a bit of a jack of all trades and employing many of these techniques in different ways to develop your campaign. Did we get a result as yet? Okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. So strategies that folks have used successfully, partnership being kind of like one that most people on the chat have used, or that responded have used. Also advisories, and with the community consultations, focus groups, so more than likely to engage residents, but I'm sure also to engage stakeholders. So we've got a group that I think, if you responded, that has a fair bit of experience, so that's useful for us to know on this end. Beatrice, why don't you let us know a little bit about what it means to your organization to seize the electoral moment?
Sure, thank you, Alex. So first and foremost, I just want to say that North York Community House has led and been involved in a number of civic engagement initiatives. Probably for at least the last 10 years, if not longer. In the last few years in particular, it has had a real intention to embed this work throughout all of our settlement and community programs. And it did so through a partnership with Samara Canada and their Democracy Talks program. By training almost all of our staff members and even some of our volunteers to be able to facilitate these Democracy Talk sessions within their own setting. So whether they're working at schools, as our settlement workers do, or in libraries or in other community settings. Sometimes we even run these outside. We did an event that we called, and that one was actually in partnership with AXA, hello AXA, and it was called Democracy is Like a Garden, and we did all of our activities outside. In the context, and so just to say that it's the entire organization that's doing this work, and I'm going to now talk about some of the pieces that I am more in charge of. So the first one is organizing, as Alex said earlier, the Get Out the Vote campaigns, and we have done a couple so far, one for the 2014 municipal elections and one for the 2015 federal elections. We're planning to continue with this work. We did see an increase of, I believe it was 6% in the neighborhood that we did this in 2014. So we were very encouraged by that. And basically what we do is, the first thing is we recruit people that live in the community who speak the languages of the residents and volunteers to be able to help us to do the outreach work. And then we knock on doors. We knock on every single door. We get about a 30% response. And then to augment that percentage, we then set up lobby tables with information. Not our own information, but information that is produced obviously by others around elections. And then we also engage one of our youth groups that is very artistic, and we get them to use colorful sidewalk chalk to chalk the entire community with encouraging messages and arrows and all kinds of other art things to try to remind the people that are voting where they're supposed to go on election day. And we do that about 2 days before the election. The other piece that Alex also mentioned is obviously setting up fun and interactive games or activities anytime that we can. So we have a lot of events and celebrations throughout the year. And so I try to sneak in as much as I can with whatever staff team is working on planning the event, and I'll ask for a table or I'll ask for a little space where I can set up anything from like getting people to sign petitions, to do postcards or letters to their politicians right on the spot, to things like Vote Popup, which is another activity that we get from Samara Canada, and it's very popular right now. And then we also make up our own games, like Who Does What in Canada version of Jeopardy, which is also a lot of fun, bingos and mix and match games and all kinds of other things. And the final part that I'm also involved in is in the planning and delivery of either one-time civic literacy workshops or a series of them, or even a full training, which would be the workshop component plus the practical component. And that way participants get a chance not only to learn whatever it is that we're teaching, but also to be able to put into practice where they work with a team of other people and they discuss the issues that concern them and then come up with a community project to, not to address the issue, but at least to get some practice and do some civic actions around that issue.
That's amazing. We're going to come back, I think, later and continue to kind of unpack some of those strategies. And there's lots of really interesting techniques that you guys have, obviously, in your 10 years of doing this work, been really embedding, learning from. I was interested in hearing a little bit of evaluation data that you have from aspects of your Get Out the Vote campaign. So we'll kind of revisit some of these elements later. Just to pivot a little bit, I'll introduce Anita Khanna. And Anita, who, as I said, is joining us from Ottawa, works at Family Service Toronto as the National Campaign Coordinator for Campaign 2000, a campaign dedicated to end child and family poverty in Canada. And she's also the Director of Social Action and Community Building. So certainly civic engagement work would fall under her bailiwick. Campaign 2000 is a nonpartisan national campaign of 120 organizations committed to securing the implementation of overdue federal resolutions and commitments to eliminate child poverty. And Anita's also been the executive director, an interim executive director at the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians, and also did citywide planning work through Social Planning Toronto as well. Anita's really going to focus in her remarks on the role of nonprofits in kind of seizing the electoral moment. But again, first we're going to do a little poll to help us kind of shape our remarks and the context. And so this poll question, once it gets up, is going to be: what kind of resources or support would help your organization engage in advocacy? And so the options are workshops, webinars, infographics, lobby kits, social media content. And again, you can select all that apply. So Anita, how are you doing in Ottawa?
Doing pretty well. Weather is warmed up. I think it's minus 10, so it's practically shorts weather. We're excited to see what people could use to help them with their advocacy. Of course, lobby kits, you know, research is great as well as talking points and stuff. So excited to see what the group says.
Excellent. I think we'll have some results pretty soon. In terms of Anita, you've done your work at Family Service Toronto in Campaign 2000. How busy are you right now in the lead up to the provincial election and the municipal election? Like, how busy are things at Family Service Toronto right now?
I'd say things are hopping. We have quite a bit of action on the municipal front. It's city budget season in Toronto, which means all sorts of things are being talked about and defended as well as put forward. And the Ontario election is really just around the corner, and we've been organizing for it, for over the last year. So we're ready to gear up, certainly.
Awesome. Yes. And yeah, I think if people are involved in kind of annual budgeting processes, you know that this work is not just whenever the election happens, but this work is year round in terms of making sure that important anti-poverty initiatives are included and other policy initiatives are included in annual budgets. We've got the results from our poll. Hopefully everybody can see them. So, top at the top of the list is lobby kits, 74%. Then we've got infographics, 64%, webinars, workshops, and social media all kind of, I mean, they're kind of coming in close range to each other.
Yeah.
And so maybe tells us that you need a range of techniques, or from people's experience, it's really drawing on this range of resources and supports that help to ensure you can do a broad advocacy work. So Anita, any kind of remarks from you on any of that before you get into your a little bit on what you're doing to seize the electoral moment?
No, I think it's great to see that lobby kits and infographics, which end up on social media a lot of the time, are really useful to people. These are things that we have on deck for our pre-election planning. And it's great to see that people, have used those in the past, and we can figure out ways to make them stronger, maybe in discussion with the group after. Excellent.
So in terms of what you're doing to seize the electoral moment right now, do you want to give us a little bit of some information about that?
Certainly, yeah. So I'll say, elections are certainly key moments for Campaign 2000. We know that everyone who is awake and tuned into social media or mainstream media is watching and talking about social policy. We do that sort of hard work between elections and in communities across Ontario, between election cycles, as we've said, and that work collaboratively with partners like United Way and Working for Change and communities across Ontario means that the issues that our sector cares about are really on the political agenda right now. So this is really such a critical time for us to talk about whether it's our clients' experiences, to release research and push for actions on solutions to poverty so that we can address precarious work, homelessness, low social assistance rates, and access to childcare. So Ontario Campaign 2000 started putting our election asks out there basically in November. So through our annual report cards on child and family poverty, we highlighted the realities that families in low income are facing in the province, whether that's hunger, worse health, gender and racial pay gaps, and the lack of childcare. So those are on our slides that I've provided some of the issues, but we also crucially provided solutions. And this is actually part of an infographic that my colleague Jessica designed and researched. So in our report card, and when we spoke to the media, we framed our recommendations in that report as our anti-poverty election platform asks. We wanted to get out quite far ahead of the election and setting a bit of a stage and a standard as to what would need to happen to address poverty in the province. We also briefed each party in the legislature about our report card and our recommendations. So I will pause for a second and say that at Family Service Toronto, we work in a pretty unique situation. We have a very small but active advocacy department that develops social policy and chairs and supports national and provincial coalitions. Always watching for key moments to engage those networks to turn up pressure on government to make much needed change. Though that when I entered the nonprofit sector 10 years ago, and I was really itching to do advocacy and talk about systemic issues, it was really hard to understand when to be vocal and how to be vocal in a way that would protect our funding and our status as an agency. There was a really strong advocacy chill at that moment, and people were concerned for good reason. I have to say, and I'm really heartened by the people who are on this webinar now who understand that we can't let that kind of chill keep us quiet, especially before these elections. Decent work, action for anti-racism, childcare, basic income, social assistance reform, and housing are really crucial issues and are becoming election issues. And we have to be vocal to make sure our communities can benefit. I will say, we have a unique role to play as nonprofits. In many contexts, nonprofits are the voice of reason. We're so connected to communities, as Beatrice was outlining, and we also aspire for better futures for the communities we are in. We're also effective. So, Campaign 2000, working with parents, workers, our really strong community partners and agencies. We've had wins recently with policy changes between elections and during elections. So We've helped end deductions to child support for families on social assistance. We've improved and redesigned the federal child benefit system. And, recently we have the $14 minimum wage that's come into effect that will go up to $15. These are things that seemed impossible when we first proposed them, and now they're becoming realities. So just speaking about how we do this kind of change, we have to be really savvy when we do advocacy, and we have to mind the line when we're doing this work. So just a few tips that come to mind for me to be advocacy savvy. So the first is to always be nonpartisan when you're doing this kind of work. As well, we need to focus on policies and party positions, not on people or individual leaders or representatives. We also have to stick to our mandates. And, we're passionate about lots of different issues, but we have to remember they don't all fall within our mandates, and we have to stick, to housing and mental health. If you operate a shelter, maybe not talk about pipelines, for example. So stay in your lane and talk about all parties. Don't single out one or two, and you can do effective advocacy. So I'll just say, as someone who works with coalitions all the time, that we recognize the real strength in numbers and doing our kind of advocacy. So we recommend, and I'd recommend people to get in touch with partners and join coalitions about the same issues. And remind people as well that, you don't have to do all the heavy lifting in terms of developing new ideas and proposals or building a base. Use materials like that Campaign 2000 develops. So whether that's, coming to meetings to meet like-minded folks, using infographics or lobby kits, as I was saying, hosting all candidates debates, that kind of thing. Those things will really help boost our efforts. And we hope, groups that join coalitions like ours will really bring forward the issues that they're facing, right? So, what are the issues your clients are facing, whether it's youth in Windsor, Indigenous folks in Toronto, or immigrant women in Thunder Bay. Please put those issues on the radar of groups that do advocacy and policy development, so we can create strong platforms that reflect the needs of more people in Ontario. And we in turn will boost your recommendations so that, action is a possibility. So we hope people will join us in calling to move the anti-poverty agenda forward in this province. And I really look forward to the discussion.
Great. Excellent, Anita. That was really informative, and love those tips. And we're going to kind of come back and revisit some of those and hear from some of the others as well. So to introduce our last panelist, Lubna Khalid. Lubna is the coordinator of Women Speak Out, and as I said, the Peer Navigator Training Program, a graduate from Voices from the Street, and a member of the Working for Change Speakers Bureau. And she's going to share her personal experience of marginalization and as an immigrant woman with unrecognized foreign credentials with local, national, and international audiences. And so Lubna is going to speak about the role of individuals and seizing the electoral moment and reflect on some of her personal experiences. So thanks, Lubna, for joining us. Just before we get there, though, I think a poll is going to pop up on people's screens. So what actions did you take in the last provincial or municipal election? And again, you can select all that apply. We have running as a candidate, volunteering on a campaign, and voting. And I think volunteering on a campaign can refer to either like a social issues campaign or an advocacy campaign, as well as a candidate's campaign. I think it's inclusive of both. Lubna, for you, what's applicable for you in this list?
I think all of it is because working with people, I think this is something that we do day in, day out. Running as a candidate, equipping them, people who come through our doors with skills and tools that they are equipped and feel that they can run for a seat and be a candidate. Sometimes, it's not all about winning; it's more about the experience. and volunteering on a campaign. A lot of our folks do volunteering, but we do also see that it's not only their time, their skills are being used. So we do make sure that they do get paid if they're doing some kind of work. And of course, voting is the basic thing. Like, and I see like the polling results are talking about voting, and there is a great deal needs to be done about voting for people to participate, for people to see beyond the barriers of socioeconomic position that they're in, making them accessible for them to get out and be aware of, because a lot of our folks, especially in Toronto, are newcomers, which have very different experience of being part of the electoral process. So how can we make every vote count?
And of course, we acknowledge in the setting up of this series that voting is really a privilege, and that there are going to be folks, as Lubna said, newcomers that don't have the franchises yet. Of course, in Ontario and across the country, we're privileged enough to know that there are groups that are working on campaigns like that, whether that's the municipal work that folks like Desmond Cole did a few years ago, that are still being kept up by some folks. So, Lubna, tell us a little bit about how you see seizing the electoral moment in this at this particular junction in time.
So my role in my nonprofit organization, it's a very small organization, even though it has a big name, and it's in the advocacy field. My role is more about training and leadership empowerment for people marginalized by poverty, by mental health, newcomers, refugees, and how to make their stories useful for societal change. So that's what we do in our training programs. But I want to start off with, like, based on the funding criteria, it's pretty hard to use our funding processes. Our funding to use it for the advocacy work. So it gives us very less margin to work with that, but still, like, we have been evolving our program for leadership. So it started with Speakers Bureau, and now we have moved to pre-employment, to peer navigator training program, which is a pilot program of City of Toronto for people who are on OW and now equipped with tools and skills to work in the OW offices as peers. So this is our basic role, and in this capacity, we have been engaged with so many initiatives around the city as our graduates are trained and are made aware about the barriers that they're facing, and how their voice is very important to be on the tables where the policies are made. So in that aspect, we have been very active in civic engagement with civic actions. With Civic Action, doing a lot of advocacy work around making people aware of, the policymakers aware of, like, the lived experience aspect of people, how the policy is affecting people. We have done work with the Party Direction Strategy in setting up League, which is Lived Experience Advisory Group. We have been involved in the whole process. So this is one of our very proud moments that we were able, with our advocacy, to do something like this. Also, I would say with Campaign 2000, a lot of times we have partnered up with the Campaign 2000 to do this kind of work as well. The Poverty Reduction Office is one of them. And also another initiative, because I was working with Women's Only, so it's Writing Relations. It's a Kathleen Donnelly Foundation initiative that's been funded for a women-led pan-Canadian adult education campaign that talks about how to bring in social change with radical adult education and educationists coming together and making the relations with the Indigenous communities and newcomers and immigrant communities, how to make it work together. And not only this, we have done various talks and media talks, and our people have been always ask, especially by Campaign 2000 when the report card is coming, like, for women to talk about what is really happening in their lives because of a policy that's been made somewhere else. So these are some of the things that we do. But recently, our work is with the Right to Housing Coalition, because the National Housing Strategy has just come out, and it's crucial for people who are living in these communities to know what that means for them, and especially at this crucial time of elections and all that, how to make it accessible for people to understand what that means in terms of budgeting, in terms of more transitional housing, more affordable housing and all that. So these are a few of the things that I have been involved, and some of our folks are involved in it too.
Excellent. Thank you, Lubna. I have maybe some questions to guide the discussion, but just thinking of something that was salient for me, I have at least one thing for each of you. So maybe I'll start with Beatrice. You talked a bit about the importance of some like pop-up, or I wouldn't even say the importance of, but just that the direction of your work has been to do more fun, creative things. That's maybe been some of your learnings. Can you talk about maybe share a little bit more about that for folks that are thinking of these different techniques?
Sure. So one of the nice things about just going into, whether it's International Women's Day or Family Day, which is coming up right around the corner, or even a summer festival or harvest and setting up these activities and these games, is that it makes it normal for people to talk about the issues that matter to them, to discuss politics, why not? And it also makes it fun. So that way we get rid of those taboos, or even, we work with a lot of people that come from all kinds of situations around the world. And it just makes it more easier for them as well to participate, because oftentimes people are running from very difficult situations in non-democracies. So that's why I think in that situation is really important. And then the civic literacy work, which is the work, the more formal workshops and the series and the trainings and all of that, that gives also an opportunity for people who have a little bit more time, have a little bit more commitment, to be able to participate a little bit more and increase their own learning, which, obviously when it comes time for elections, and really at all times, but around elections, it helps them to have more information and maybe to be able to ask questions that are more appropriate, first of all, to this level of government, because they do X, Y, and Z, versus asking, this candidate about something that may be related to a different level of government. So it makes them that much more informed and able to ask those kinds of questions.
And I imagine it elicits the experiences, like similar to what Lubna was saying, the lived experiences that people have in different ways. So maybe not everybody can talk about transit policy, but they have an experience of riding the bus or riding the transit system that they can draw on. Lubna, do you want to tell us maybe a little bit more around why centering the lived experiences of folks is critical to this work? I mean, I think among some of the folks that might be joining us for this webinar, there's so many different things that they could do to engage in this work with other stakeholders and partners, networks, community members. But why is it important that we create space for centering this work around folks' lived experience?
Thank you, Alex. It's I think it's very important for people to feel that they are connected to a situation, and for them to use their lived experience. For example, for housing, it's very different when you have a limited amount of rent, and it's very difficult when you have to have a certain criteria how you're going to use that rent, or is it like rent geared to income, or all kinds of these situations which are they look perfect when you're making the policy, but how it comes to the person who's living that policy, and how it gets translated into the person's life. I think that's what needs to be told, and I think that's why it's important to tell your story, to talk about your experience in a situation. Like, for example, for me, it was my credentials when I was talking about that, like, if I have a master's and all that, but what does it mean for me to transfer my skills as my education background coming here, right? So if I'm not going to talk about what are the barriers for me, I think it's going to be hard for people who are making the policies for newcomers, like, how to use our skills for the community. So that's why I think it's very important for us to really talk about our living experience and to really feel that this is somebody's life that you're talking about, and this is their reality and experience. And I think it's very crucial to inform the process of policy making by the people who are sharing their
so important. And I mean, I think, and what we'll get Anita in on this in a second, but given that these windows of opportunity, sometimes come and go, and maybe far in between on some of these issues, depending on what the issue is and which level of government and how complex, but definitely makes sense that we need to get it right, and we need to engage as many folks with lived experience in that process, so that we're really making sure that we're seizing those opportunities with the most impact. Anita, you talked a little bit about, the role of FST and some of the campaigns that you've worked on, and how organizations kind of engage in this work if they haven't, if they don't have, let's say, a staff person that's dedicated to advocacy or policy. For the folks that might be newer on the webinar, how would they figure out where to start, where they should start connecting, what action might be most appropriate for them, what network? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think really, Uzma Shakir, who works at City of Toronto now, but used to work at CASA, would say good advocacy really starts at home, right? So it's very authentic. It has to be very authentic to people's experiences, the agencies they're at, or their mandates, let's say. So I think really taking the time within our organizations to assess, what are the trends and issues we're seeing among our clients? What is the goal of our organization? What are we really connected to with our mandate will help sort of, in a sense, narrow down, right, where you could turn for resources or to join in coalition or partnerships with folks. So certainly, there's work ongoing out there through the Workers' Action Center and the $15 in Fairness campaign around decent work provisions. And I mean, that is an issue that's in the news constantly everywhere across the province and the country right now, right? So that's an example of a place where you turn. There are also, so Campaign 2000 is working on child and family poverty issues. Certainly, we understand poverty in a very holistic sense. So, we can be either a gateway or a connection to connect with people who are working on housing or mental health or the social determinants of health and childcare issues. The other really important group that is going to come out with some election material is the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. So I think, those resources will talk about the economics of making smart social policy, as well as some of the impacts, right? There are also groups like the Income Security Advocacy Center that are really helping to equip people with information so that already dire and destitute, low social assistance rates don't get plunged down any further, but instead are improved, and that talk about improving social assistance rates actually results in action. So, I mean, we have moments coming up in this province, for example, around making budget submissions to make our asks and our recommendations known. People have the option to endorse some of the budget submissions that are coming from the groups I just mentioned. But certainly, my sense is that if people have a United Way or a public health unit in their community that they're connected to, that those two sort of groups or examples would be at least plugged in to some advocacy that's happening. So whether plugged into what's happening through United Way nationally or to Toronto, York region, they could get a sense of what kind of involvement there is. I think it is very critical that we all share our resources and knowledge of either established coalitions or up and coming ones that are highlighting really important grassroots issues.
Really great insights, Anita. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about, I mean, it kind of came up, like the length of time that folks have been working on this stuff. You know, maybe Anita, cycle, and think a little bit about, or reflect back for us, like, how does the work that you're doing, like, what's the best time to engage? You know, like, are you doing your research and coming up with the policy recommendations like a month before the election, a month after, 6 months before? Like, how do you make those decisions about when to engage in what part of the work?
It's a good strategy question, Alex. I think, I mean, as I mentioned, we're unique in that we're doing this work between election cycles and, you know, in the lead up to them as well at our organization. I mean, I would never discourage anyone from sort of getting involved at any point. It's part of my my civic engagement participation, you know, passion is that, okay, you know, there's an election coming up, you know, jump in, educate yourself, read some research, talk to great people in your communities like Libna or Beatrice, or your local equivalent, and sort of learn what's happening on the ground and follow that passion. I think, you know, that applies both to individuals and organizations. Of course, you know, if you're going to in with something written or like a, you know, something really public, you know, devoting more time, anticipating those calendar dates is really important. So, you know, thinking about it a year or two in advance is great. 6 months is great too. But, you know, as I also said earlier, I think when we plug into efforts that are ongoing, that are open to new members, that we share values with, we can have an impact on what they're putting forward and also join, you know, this is all about, in a sense, movement building or building a critical mass and contributing to that. So as I say, I wouldn't discourage people from stepping in when they're ready and when, you know, the moment strikes, but certainly working to plan or build in involvement in advance, you know, would be amazing and would really help, I think, turn the tide on a lot of the issues that we're passionate about in the nonprofit sector.
Excellent. Thanks, Anita. Beatrice, you talked a little bit about the organization, North York Community House, your partnership with Samara, the idea of embedding this work across like a number of different functions. You talked a little bit about how you're doing it in events, but you know, different teams within the organization, so that you've moved from really this work sitting with, you know, maybe the community development staff person or the policy staff person, but across the organization in what I would say is a great, but like, you know, a regular social service agency that has multiple functions: after school programs, women's programs, seniors programs. You guys do it all. Employment. So why was it important that you made that shift and that you did that work with Samara and that you really thought about how do we embed this work in our organization?
I think it was important because if we didn't do it, then we probably wouldn't be able to advance as much as we've had, obviously. It's also important because in order for staff to be willing to, we often say the word buy-in or take ownership or any of that, it's really important for them to feel supported. And so by making it accessible and even encouraging everyone from management to frontline workers to learn together, and we did learn together. I mean, it could be, you could be learning right beside your executive director at times, to learn these about these activities and how to facilitate them is really important, because then staff feel like it's everybody is there together. It's an effort that we're all doing as a team. It's also important in terms of accountability, because if managers know what staff are expected to do or what tools they're using or what activities they're facilitating, then it's easier for them to help their staff with their planning of their activities or their work plan or whatever. It's easier for them to support them. And it's also important, for example, one of the things that we've done is we've asked managers to put civic participation as a standing item in their team meetings. So every month, every team is required to report on their activities. And so doing it that way and being accountable in that way, again, helps with both being able to do more work across the organization, but also having that sense of I'm being supported, this is part of my work, it's not just an add-on onto my already huge list of things to do. With less and less time and less resources. So it helps in multiple ways. The other thing that we've also done, because people like myself, for example, have been doing this work obviously much longer, is giving the staff the option, for example, if they're new staff or if it's the first time that they're doing this work, to be able to co-facilitate with me or to see me do it first. Or, you know, and we have the Civic Engagement team, which is a staff team made up of people from, you know, representing each of our programs. And that's one of the things that we're tasked with doing, is being able to support other staff, because we're always getting new staff as well, and being able to demonstrate and to help out as much as we can, and distribution of resources and producing resources and all of that stuff.
Great. I love that tip about building it into different teams' work as a standing activity, and for sure it's the reality that most of the folks are probably facing increasing demand on time, increasing expectations, and then not enough time to do some of these pieces. So we really have to build it in if we want it to happen. I want to ask we've got some questions from the audience too that we're going to weave in a little bit. And so one was around how do you create space for your issue in and among the noise of the environment? So, you know, lots of competing campaigns, 15 in fairness, decent work, you know, anti-racism work and agendas. Does anybody want to go with that? Maybe Anita, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, no, I think we all worry about getting attention when it's noisy out there, and there's a lot going on, but I think it's very important to see the intersections between our work and recognize that, you know, like competition sort of dynamic, you know, is not one we have to sort of fall to. I think there's room for all our sort of stuff out there in terms of sort of getting airspace or capturing attention. I think we have to be strategic. So we might not get the editorial page in our local newspaper to endorse our idea right away. But if we can get to, you know, people who we think are going to be really important in the cabinet, let's say, of the provincial government, should that party be elected, and we go to all the different, you know, different key candidates, let's say, like people we think who are influential within their parties and such, with our proposals, that's another way in, right? And I think another element of doing that is being really compelling and telling our stories, right? So the kind of work that Lubna does is so really critical to what our Campaign 2000 efforts can achieve, because we're able to work with people with lived experience of poverty to talk about the impact of inadequate social assistance rates or lack of childcare. And, you know, we try to circle back to find out from people, okay, so your child benefits went up. Let's get a story now in the Toronto Star, which is where we're located and is the most widely distributed newspaper in Canada. Let's get a story in there about what this means for people and show the impact. So I do think it can feel difficult, and like we're just sort of small specks in you know, a much larger campaign that we're surrounded in. But you know, taking strategic action and finding ways to amplify ourselves, you know, help make our issues election issues.
Mm-hmm. Great. We had another question, which I think is relevant, and I'll look to Lubna for this next one. around, like, our organizations are made up of not just kind of staff and participants or community members, but they're also made up of board members and donors. And so I'm wondering, Libna, if in your work, really working with folks with and activating your voice and working with folks with lived experience, if you've done any interesting activities or work in kind of bringing boards of organizations along or donors along in kind of understanding the importance of this work.
Right. Our board, again, like, I'm talking about my small nonprofit organization, and our board is diverse in so many ways. But I wanted to talk a little bit about partnership, the importance of partnership in this kind of work, because that has a big impact on our work and how we get donation or funders, like, on our board or on our, like, on our site. So I think it's very important to not only tell your story, but also keep an open eye on, like, what are the trending kind of pieces that are around, and how can we make our voice heard through reaching it out to funders who can help us, like, do this kind of work. And we have partnered up with a lot of our local agencies on this, like, for example, Gerstein, for example, the City of Toronto, and Campaign 2000, in order for us to see, like, the critical work that we're doing and how it's gonna emphasize in, like, eliminating the barriers that we're trying to eliminate. So I think it's very important that we do not only speak up, but also speak to the right audience in order for them to come along and be partners with us.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Libna. So we don't have a ton of time, and I want to make sure that we're able to give the closing remarks. I'm gonna maybe close on and touch on a couple of the quick themes that came out. So we heard, it's critical to engage in networks. Really, as you get more advanced in your thinking about this work, as you try new things, that you also want to think about how do you embed the culture of change, a culture of fostering and activating these conversations across your organization. You want to really center the work that you're doing with with voices of lived experience. Depending on your resources, you find creative ways to stay engaged with issues between elections. Sometimes that can just be staying on an email list in between elections and really having a conversation with somebody who is staying engaged and making sure that you can play a role whenever you can. And then ongoing, accessible, practical, fun opportunities, which Beatrice talked a lot about. And should you have the capacity to vote, that it's crucial that we all participate in the process. I think Anita said it beautifully when she said advocacy starts at home. So that's really, practice what we preach and encourage others through direct action, civic and different direct action type projects or initiatives. So I really want to thank the audience for participating, and I want to thank the panelists for participating. Anita in Ottawa and Beatrice and Libna here in Toronto with me. Really, it's been an amazing chat. I wish we had an extra hour, but want to end on time. So I'll turn it back to Estelle to give final closing remarks.
Yeah, I just want to thank all the webinar participants for participating and putting up with us with our little sound technical problems at the beginning. I think you'll agree it was worth persevering through that. It was a really inspiring webinar. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as we did. You're going to be receiving a follow-up email shortly with a feedback survey and some information about our next webinar, which is going to take place on March 7th. The theme is, what is public policy and does your nonprofit need a strategy? I hope you'll join us then. Thanks very much.
Thank you.